Yes, sir. It is time for the smoking hot tip of the week, and feel a little guilty, man. I love chatting with DJ Mentzel over at Texas Star Grill Shop, but we've had some podcasts that have gone long, and we've had some other guys on. Like to keep everything moving, but DJ is one of the best over at Texas Star, and love having you on, DJ. I'm gonna make it a little difficult for you because this is one of those where you can't necessarily say, "Well, I do brisket like this" or "I do that like that." Which people always appreciate. We appreciate your knowledge on that. But, it was sort of an organic question that I got when I was out at the Houston Rodeo Cook-Off a while back. People were talking about watching some of the competitors make their food so pretty. I mean, they were making their food very, very pretty. And I had a buddy of mine said, "Man, how can I do that?" I said, "You can do that." And in fact, it got me the idea. I'm going to talk to DJ about that. It's not competition level, but there are little things you can do, as a backyard pit master, because we always talk about people eat with their eyes first, and it sort of gets the senses going and all that. So I wanted to kind of give you the floor in a sense. Like, I love my barbecue. I love making my barbecue appealing for just guests, just family, et cetera. So, I mean, that's something that I'm guessing you agree with. But what are some of the things that you like to do to do that?
Well, 100%. First of all, presentation is very important. I mean, you do eat with your eyes first. I mean, you could have the most delectable meal in front of you, but if it's poop brown, I mean, you're just hesitant, right? And it does get into the psyche when you're looking at food, and if it doesn't look appeasing, you might have a different reaction to how it tastes, right? And that's why any cooking show or any kind of judge system, you get presented. Or you get graded on presentation. There's a lot of different things that you can do for presentations. A lot of stuff at home is really small stuff. Like you get like even on like Asian food, you see a lot of poppy seeds and such, right? And you see these type of sesame seeds and that white contrast. You typically like to contrast something either bright or completely different contrasting color on top of it. So on ribs, if you're doing like, let's say like a nice sticky rib, I love doing like an Asian style rib. So I'll put some sesame seeds on there and that white really does pop. Conversely, like really you see a lot of chives and like green onions, that bright, vibrant color popping on top. It's really good. I mean, even down to if you're posting on Instagram or X or whatever social media out there, using some of these filters that really add contrast. You see a lot more brighter colors there and really highlight the reds of the world, right?
Yeah. And the other thing I was going to talk to you about here, by the way, tell me if you need to go. Just raise your finger. Yeah, go ahead.
What's going on, Raf? It's a contractor. He went to the bathroom.
Okay, like if you have to do that ever, and for future, just go like this, and I'll stop, and then I'll edit it out. The other thing I wanted to ask you about that ties directly into this, DJ, is something that I think maybe I'm a snob about it. I don't know, but this whole concept that's age old of fall off the bone ribs. I got to tell you, I am not a fan of fall off the bone ribs. I don't think it's attractive, first of all, and you probably overdid it. But let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, yeah, for sure. It's overcooked when it's fall off the bone tender, and it comes from people would always notoriously undercook pork, and it's really tough and chewy, and so this fall off the bone feels good. It's tender, so people started overcooking it. What you typically want is like a perfect bite through, right, where it pulls off the bone, but it's still intact. It's like the perfect rib texture there. Definitely don't overcook it. I'm with you on that.
And the other thing, which ties in with making it appealing to your guests, even if you're just in your backyard, but I think also, as we all know, adds a lot of flavor. And that's after all the hours of cooking, whatever it is, however it is, and people listen to this podcast, I've probably picked up several different techniques. Right before you serve, after you rested, or maybe right before you rested, depending on your mood, dusting it maybe with a little rub, maybe a little one more layer of sauce, Obviously, we prefer OG sauce, but and that's not just for ribs. That can be for brisket. That can be for pork ribs. That's got to be something that a lot of people maybe let slip through the cracks.
Don't. Yeah, I think most people underseason their food for sure, and a little dusty on the end. Like if I'm at a competition, that's definitely one of the things I do is after I cut it and just a little dust, just a little bit more right there on the edge, right? It hits your tongue, it hits your palate first, right? So you get hit with some of the umami or the saltiness of the rub.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to presentation, like on ribs specifically, and if we're doing competition, I mean, it goes all the way back to picking the ribs, right? And you're trying to get the straightest bones you can get.
Yeah.
And then you're trying to get perfectly straight, symmetrical lines. You're trying to fit 4 to 6 in the box, depending. And you really want them very uniform. I mean, this is all presentation, right? And these are small, minute things. It doesn't necessarily change the flavor of things, but it does change the difference between, let's say, finishing top 10 and top 50.
Yeah, it changes your mindset. And I think I'll make it a question because I want to get your opinion on this. More so on pulled pork than anything. A little added something at the end, it can make or break even just a good dinner at home.
100%. Yeah, 100%. I typically never just pull pork and just leave it as pulled pork.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a great base to do so many different flavors. Mm-hmm. And it's not just like barbecue sauce, like throwing OG sauce on there is great. Don't get me wrong. But you can do so many different things there with it.
I make my tamales with pulled pork. I put some Spanish seasoning when I'm cooking it. Whatever Camino, even cumin, whatever you want to call it. And then at the end, you can even put some what is it?
Seasoning.
Yes, exactly. Anything of that nature. But it works. And one more thing on making it appealing to everyone at your backyard barbecue or whatever you want to call it is also make sure, and I shouldn't have to say this, but I've seen a lot of people do it. Make sure that even there, the good slices matter, and make sure you know how to slice a brisket. Take us through that real quick because there's a technique. We've talked about it, but you don't just slice brisket. Tell us how you do it.
You want to definitely, so you can do it one of two ways, right? Typically, if you come down to the trim, you can really bring it down to a point, and then which is where the grain's running. You want to go against the grain to about, it's typically halfway. It's where the flat and the point lay on top of each other. Then you have to turn it 90 degrees and slice it that way. Or you can start with slicing it pretty much right down the middle, kind of feel it, and then you go straight against grain there. You turn the other one 90 degrees. 100% like presentation. When you're serving brisket, people want to see the bark. They want to see the smoke ring.
Pull it apart.
Pull it apart. These are all super important, right? And if it's got that jiggle where you're holding it on a finger, the bend test is good. Mm-hmm. These things are all optics, and they really get your mouth watering, right? I think we're kind of primal at nature. We see nice juicy meat smoked right there. Your mouth starts watering a little bit. You want to take a bite, and then when you want something and you get it, it typically tastes better.
Do you split the tip in half horizontally?
Sometimes. Mm-hmm. So when I'm doing like more for a bigger group, I will, just because I can get more slices out of it. Mm-hmm. If I'm just at the backyard with no.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good stuff. I like those big pieces.
Yeah. That's DJ Mentzel. That's the big brain on DJ that we like to tap into for the Smoking Hot Tip of the Week every week, and we'll do it again next week. We'll hit DJ up again with something that I think is fun to talk about, and that's and people tend to forget, and that's the weather and how it can affect your cook. But for now, you guys, appreciate you joining us. Appreciate you always subscribing to the podcast, and of course, Texas Star Grill Shop for bringing us this podcast every week. Until next week. Let's have a good week, good weekend, and don't forget to smoke it up. We will talk to you next time. All right, unless you got to go, I'll go right into the next one.
Yeah, no, I think he's already been here like 3 times. I don't think he needed anything. It's just a contract.
All right. All right. So here we go. Time for the Smoking Hot Tip of the Week with DJ Mentzel over at Texas Star Grill Shop. Don't forget, Texas Star Grill Shop brings you this podcast every week, and we love talking to all the experts there. And DJ definitely is one that you want to listen to what he has to say. And this one is interesting to me. And of course, we've touched on it on the podcast with some of the great pit masters and chefs that have been on here. But it really hit home on when I was at the cook-off at the Houston Rodeo Cook-Off. The weather didn't seem bad. Like 2 years ago, it was cold, it was rainy, it was windy, and all that. And clearly, the weather was a factor in how people were tending their pits. But for our backyard cooks, it doesn't have to be rainy or windy or cold for you to have to tend that pit, because one thing that happened, and maybe people don't really pay attention to it as much, especially on big briskets and such, where you really have to tend the fire, is the humidity fluctuated 3 days, 3 different levels of humidity. It was real low, then real high, then back low, and then the wind. The wind on some of these pits was wreaking havoc. It was a beautiful bluebird sky, but I wanted to ask you about some of the elements and how you adjust to them. And it doesn't necessarily have to be cold, DJ.
No, it doesn't. Wind can be a big factor in really positioning of the pit, right? If where your intake is and where your firebox is, if that's the direction of the flame, or direction of the wind, I should say, it's really just going to spike that flame. Even if you've got it cracked, it's just going to run hotter temperatures as long as it's a dry, arid day. And if you can't move or rotate that grill, you're just going to have to deal with that wind hitting your intake, which that's just going to spike your temperatures. You're going to have to probably either choke it down or let that fire burn down a little bit. So it can be definitely very tricky. You can't really control Mother Nature, especially at something like a cook-off when it's a set date. You rain, sleet, or snow, you gotta get out there and cook. Really, the big hassle is when it's really raining, in my opinion, because it just cools down the steel so much, and you have to churn and burn so much more. Just changes the way of a pit normally would work.
Yeah. I think one thing that a lot of our listeners might fall into the habit of, they get, let's say they're practicing with a new pit, they get the damper just right or the smokestack just right, and they just leave it like that, hell or high water, every time they cook. And I think that's something that people tend to make a mistake on. Sometimes on windy days, on colder days, on hotter days, whatever, that's a tool, right? I mean, that's something that you have to always adjust.
It's like a tuner. It's all it is. It's just tuning the fire. Ultimately, it comes down to fire management, and it's how you've got the fire, how your fire is burning, and how the air is circulating in there. And you might know your pit on a clear sunny day with no wind. You can kind of go with that same exact door ratio or vent system, but you start introducing any kind of rain or any kind of wind, it's going to adjust that. You have to be on the fly.
How do you start? Let's say it's an offset smoker for these purposes. Me personally, I always start with the door wide open, because I think that's the sort of the baseline of the heat that I know. And then, because if you start it closed and damper down a little bit, then the heat can get too hot too quick, or whatever it may be, or too cold on other days. How do you starting your pit at a certain baseline? To me, seems to be important.
I always start it fully open. I always use like a bag of lump charcoal to get a good bed of coals going. And once that's going hot and it's got the door wide open, I'll put in some logs and stuff. And then once I get the temperature and stuff like that, every pit is different, but I typically always start with the door wide open, right? You want as much flow. And that's the same even on like a Kamado Joe or a Big Green Egg, you typically want to start those fires fully wide open. And then once it's getting close to temp, not once it gets to temp, but about 50 degrees away from temperatures, when you want to start trying to dial it in.
That's a great tip. And I'm not going to say, I forget that all the time. And I'm like, oh, it's almost there. And all of a sudden I'm running hot.
You're over it. Yeah.
But 50 degrees is kind of a good template. Last thing for you here, for our listeners, we all cook everything, but brisket seems to be the one where you really have to control it. And part of the other thing is every brisket is different. You're going to have a stall on briskets pretty much every time at some point, but you almost have to marry the meat, so to speak, to the temperature, and then adjust the temperature, because that brisket may not be cooking like the last brisket you cooked, correct?
Yeah, there's no two briskets that are the same. I've had a brisket finish at like 183 before, which is typically when I'm in a stall.
Mm-hmm.
I've had briskets finish at 207, which is typically way overdone. Every piece of meat is different, especially when it comes to brisket. But I typically, once I get to the stall and I wrap it, I typically start jacking my temperatures at that point. I like to go temp up there and kind of just burn through the stall, because once you wrap it, it doesn't really matter. BTU is BTU.
Okay, so you said 183 to 207. How do you know that it's done? I'm guessing just feel. And what are you feeling for?
Yeah, a probe tender. When you stick your meat thermometer in there, instant read. If you don't have one, definitely get one. Stick it in there, checking your temperatures. You're trying to get a good gauge. Most briskets are truthfully between 195, 200 on most cases. But if you're sticking in there and it feels like you're pushing through butter, then it's done.
Yeah.
It really does depend on the brisket. That's really the only true telltale sign.
Well, DJ, you are the man. Catch us up on anything going on at Texas Star Grill Shop this week and next, because we're getting into the spring. It's time, man.
Yeah, man, weather's getting good. I'm out here cooking every day almost. I'm cooking my lunch pretty much every day up here. But on Saturdays, man, we got free beer, free food. We're giving out samples and stuff. Don't get a beer.
You can't beat that. And you're at the Woodlands location, just so
Yes,
people know. But the Texas Star does that everywhere. That's DJ Mentzel. This is the Smoking Hot Tip of the Week. And this is the Bite Meat Podcast. We really enjoyed doing this. Really enjoy having some great guests like DJ on here as often as possible. You guys have a great week. Have a great weekend. Smoke it up. And we will talk to you next time. Done.